All right, and we're back. Okay, let's do part two. So when we last left off, we saw this hearse that was approaching after the car crash had happened. We know they're all kind of sitting in this ditch and seeing what's going to happen, right? So they're waiting a while. We're seeing that this driver gets out, kind of an ominous looking dude. The children are screaming that they've had an accident. The grandmother, in kind of the typical fashion that we've seen from her, look at this interaction that she has with this guy. So, good afternoon, he said. I see you all had a little spill. We turned over twice, said the grandmother. Once, he corrected. We seen it happen. Try their car and see will it run, hear him? He said quietly to the boy with the gray hat. So already we're getting the grandmother caught in a lie. And I think that we can kind of assume here that the grandmother is saying that, oh, we've had this terrible, awful accident. Please feel sorry for us. And she lies, saying the car turned over twice. And this character says, no, let's be honest about this, okay? Which is interesting, especially if you read the story and you know who this guy is, and considering that he's the one that's being truthful here, right? And here is where things start to heat up even a little more. John Wesley, the younger kid, he says, "Hey, what you doing with a gun?" Right? So we see that there's a gun in the situation now, which kind of raises the stakes a little bit. Then we have this man who asks the lady, right, so the mom, to kind of calm the children down because the children make him nervous. And as a reader in this moment, the stakes are risen a little bit more because you're thinking, ooh, there's a gun here, and a guy is saying, shut the kids up, right? So already you're feeling this sense of, uh-oh, things just got intense. And it feels a little unexpected, especially if you're not familiar with Flannery O'Connor. I mean, she's a funny writer, but manages to get to points like these to where you were thinking, oh, I didn't see that coming. To borrow another term from George Saunders, he has this category that he thinks of when he reads called things I couldn't help but notice in the story. And especially when you read short stories, you're reading short stories with these, maybe you're not thinking about them explicitly, but as a reader in a short story, you're thinking, okay, this is going to be resolved at some point. When is this going to come back in? And so we know from the beginning of the story, when she's discussing a newspaper article with Bailey and also with her interaction with the Red Sammy, that the misfit is going to come into play. And here he is, right? So behind them, the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. Come here, said the mother. And this is kind of a sense of foreboding, right? So we're already feeling a little bit ominous here. And then the grandmother, oh, what is she doing? She says, you're the misfit. She said, I recognize you at once. And as every logical reader is thinking, we're thinking, woman, shut up, right? The misfit says, yes'm, the man said, smiling slightly as if he were pleased in spite of himself to be known. But it would have been better for all of you, lady, if you hadn't recognized me. And this is where things start to increase, to where we start to kind of see what the meaning behind the story is, because it's going to launch the grandmother into an understanding of what all this is. So now she is starting to realize, I could die here. I could die. And so if we think about the characterization that we've had up until this point, we know that the grandmother is a manipulative person. She has lied. She's a bit of a nagger. She's untruthful. She is racist. She's conceited, right? She wants to look a particular way even if she dies. She cares more about her own kind of like emotional comfort and perceptions as opposed to like even her physical well-being and wishing that she'd got hurt so Bailey wouldn't chew her out. So we've got this person who might be like a stereotype of an older generation, curmudgeon-y old woman. And now we're putting her in a scenario that is literally life-threatening. And we're going to see how she responds. And her response, assuming Flannery O'Connor is writing in this particular way, should illuminate something in us, right? So we get the grandmother essentially start begging for her life. She says, well, you wouldn't shoot a lady, would you? And look at this. She says, I know you're a good man. You don't look a bit like you have common blood. I know you must come from nice people. And thinking back to the first video about a good man is hard to find, we saw Red Sammy and the grandmother drawing conclusions about goodness based off of charity or based off of someone's appearance. And now here, the grandmother is doing the same thing. She's connecting goodness to appearances. So he looks like a good person. You don't look like you have a bit of common blood. Now we're incorporating class into this. Well, you don't look like you're a low class person. What are you doing killing someone, right? It looks like you come from nice people. The implication there, or at least my interpretation, nice people being middle class, upper class people. You look like a well-established person. What are you doing in this scenario? Yes, ma'am, he said, finest people in the world. When he smiled, he showed a row of strong white teeth. God never made a finer woman than my mother, and my daddy's heart was pure gold. So he's in agreement. He's like, yeah, I come from good people. And once again, look at these Southern Gothic elements. In a cloud in the sky, he remarked, looking up at it, don't see no sun, but don't see no cloud neither. Think about that for a second. There's no sun in the sky. There's no sun. It's cloudless. It's bright. There's no sun. That's impossible, right? So once again, it should give you the sense as a reader, even if it's not explicit, but you're kind of like your unthinking brain in the background. It's kind of interpreting these elements like the monkey and the lack of sun. It's like, this is weird and dark, right? And that's what's going on here, right? Listen, she said, you shouldn't call yourself the misfit because I know you're a good man at heart. I can just look at you and tell. So once again, connecting goodness to appearance. And we're going to see that this is something that is faulty because we know that you cannot draw the connection between goodness and the way someone looks. The grandmother reached up to adjust her hat brim as if she were going to the woods with him. But it came off in her hand. She stood staring at it, and after a second, she let it fall on the ground. And even these ideas, this sense of wanting to look a particular way, it seems like in this instant that even her appearance is starting to become more disheveled, not as put together once it's actually threatened with this life or death situation. And let's get some of the characterization of the misfit here. So, Bailey boy, the grandmother called in a tragic voice, but she found she was looking at the misfit squatting on the ground in front of her. I just know you're a good man, she said desperately. You're not a bit common. No, I ain't a good man, the misfit said, after a second as if after he considered her statement carefully. But I ain't the worst in the world either. My daddy said I was a different breed of dog from my brothers and sisters. You know, Daddy said, it's some that can live their whole life out without asking about it, and it's others has to know why it is, and this boy is one of the latters. He's going to be into everything. And so we get this expression, these ideas from the misfit's father that are helping us understand who he is. He's someone who is critically examining everything that's going on in his life. And that's what presumably is getting him into trouble here. The grandmother is still pleading, trying to get him to look at it in a different way. Well, you could be honest if you'd only try, said the grandmother. Think how wonderful it would be to settle down and live a comfortable life and not have to think about somebody chasing you all the time. Now, drawing this back with what we know about the grandmother, it doesn't seem authentic, right? She's trying to manipulate the situation so she can survive. And now think about this. Throughout this entire story, we've never seen the grandmother, not once, touch on the idea of faith. And now we're going to get a huge section to where that is the primary focus of her persuasion is faith. And we know that Flannery O'Connor is Catholic and that much of her writing has to do with her own faith and what it looks like to live that out in an authentic way. So she's definitely making some kind of commentary here. The grandmother asked, do you ever pray? No, he said. We get a pistol shot in the woods, so we know that the family is being killed. The misfit tells us that he was a gospel singer, that he's done all sorts of things. He has all sorts of experiences. He's seen so much. The grandmother says, pray, pray. The grandmother began, pray, pray, which is so weird. In situations like this, what you do is you pray. You don't say the words pray or command someone to pray. It's like her understanding of the world and faith is not computing, right? It's like her background, her faith is something that is inauthentic. She's just kind of throwing it out there, hoping that it saves her in her time of turmoil, as opposed to actually leaning on it as something that is authentic and fulfilling and life-giving in her life. The misfit says, I never was a bad boy that I remember of, in an almost dreamy voice, but somewhere along the line I'd done something wrong and got sent to the penitentiary. The grandmother says, that's when you should have started to pray. And then she keeps trying to plead with him, like, well, you couldn't have done anything that bad. Maybe it was by mistake. Maybe you stole something. The misfit, he assures her, it's like, no, it was nothing like that. If you would only pray, the old lady said, Jesus would help you. So now we're bringing Jesus into the story to help him out. That's right, the misfit said. Well, then why don't you pray? She asked, trembling with delight suddenly. I don't want no help, he said. I'm doing all right by myself. And so now we get this interesting acknowledgement from the misfit that it's not that he doesn't believe in Jesus, it's that he doesn't want Jesus's help. So it's almost like he has this kind of concrete faith in what he thinks Jesus is, but is choosing to just commit a different type of action, right? So the misfit said while he was buttoning it up, this is important. I almost skipped right over this. We know the misfit doesn't have a shirt on. We know that Bailey is just killed in the woods. And then we see that the misfit puts on Bailey's shirt, right? It gets thrown to him by Bobby Lee. Bobby Lee puts on Bailey's shirt. So the grandmother's son, his shirt is now being worn by the misfit, right? And this is why the misfit calls himself the misfit. He has this idea that he's suffered so much in life, and yet the things that he has done, and now we know this, like all this murder, doesn't match all the suffering that he has taken on himself. So that's why he's doing these things, which seems kind of like the classic villain, right? Like evil for evil's sake right here, at least, right? Okay, alone with the misfit, the grandmother found that she had lost her voice. There was not a cloud in the sky, nor any sun. There it is again. There was nothing around her but woods. She wanted to tell him that he must pray. She opened and closed her mouth several times before anything came out. Finally, she found herself saying, Jesus, Jesus, meaning Jesus will help you. But the way she was saying it, it sounded as if she might be cursing. Interesting, right? It's not like invoking God or asking God for help. It's like a curse. It's not authentic, right? She's just using these things almost as like a magic spell. Get me out of this situation, right? Okay, yes, a misfit said as if he agreed. Jesus shown everything off balance. It was the same case with him as with me, except he hadn't committed any crime. They could prove I'd committed one because they had the papers on me. He said, they never show me my papers. That's why I signed myself. So he starts talking about keeping track of the things that he's done, trying to make things fit with the punishment. Does it seem all right to you, lady, that one is punished a heap and another ain't punished at all? Jesus, the old lady cried, you've got good blood. I know you wouldn't shoot a lady. I know you come from nice. Pray, Jesus, you ought not to shoot a lady. I'll give you all the money I got. Now think about this statement. This is wild. So this is associating goodness with blood, right? So a family's lineage here is what she's saying is goodness. Now, a modern sentiment would have us look at that and say, no, we know tons of people in different families. Some are good, some are bad. It's not attached to family or blood or what you look like. She's got it totally wrong. She says, you're coming from a nice family. Just pray. And then we see that there's like this inauthentic aspect to it where she says, I'll give you everything I got. She abandons her faith in this moment. And she says, just take my money, right? Lady, the misfit said, and this is a really cool thing he says, looking beyond her far into the woods, there never was a body that give the undertaker a tip, right? Essentially admitting here, I'm going to kill you. There's no point in you giving me money. So we hear two more pistol reports. This is where Bailey dies, actually. So the misfit says this, Jesus was the only one that ever raised the dead, the misfit continued, and he shouldn't have done it. He's shown everything off balance. He did what he said, then it's nothing for you to do but throw away everything and follow him. And if he didn't, then it's nothing for you to do but enjoy the few minutes you got left the best way you can, by killing somebody or burning down his house or doing some other meanness to him. No pleasure but meanness, he said, and his voice had become almost a snarl. So now we're seeing here that the misfit, he's choosing a particular Jesus to believe in. He's given two paths. So Jesus either did what he said or he did not. If he did what he said, then what you have to do is live how Jesus said to live. But if he didn't do those things, then why the heck would we bother being moral or ethical? In fact, if you don't think Jesus did what he said he did, then what you should do is just do whatever gives you pleasure. And for the misfit, meanness is pleasure. So in a very weird way, the misfit, in his faith that Jesus didn't do what he said, is actually more authentic than the grandmother with her faith. The misfit is following through with his faith. It looks like meanness to him because he chooses not to believe in the story about Jesus. The grandmother, in what she said, we would know, would have kind of this, tacit belief in Jesus, to where really it's, you're an American. You believe in Jesus from her perspective, right? But we see that this is not played out in the way that she's living. It's not authentic. We haven't seen faith or her belief in Jesus in any aspect of her life, right? She's this manipulative, lying person, right? So that's what's going on here. And he says, there's no pleasure but to be mean. Then the old lady says that, the grandmother says this, well, maybe he didn't raise the dead. Why would she say that? Why would she now revert back on her belief in Jesus? So the misfit says this, I wish I'd have been there, he said, hitting the ground with his fist. It ain't right that I wasn't there, because if I'd have been there, I would have known. Listen, lady, he said in a high voice, if I'd have been there, I would have known that I wouldn't be like I am now. His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own, as if he were going to cry, and she murmured, why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. She reached out and touched him on the shoulder. The misfit sprang back as if a snake had bitten him and shot her 3 times through the chest. Then he put his gun down on the ground and took off his glasses and began to clean them. Hiram and Bobby Lee returned from the woods and stood over the ditch, looking down at the grandmother, who half sat and half lay in a puddle of blood with her legs crossed under her like a child's, and her face smiling up at the cloudless sky. Without his glasses, the misfit's eyes were red-rimmed and pale and defenseless looking. Take her off and throw her where you've shown the others, he said, picking up the cat that was rubbing itself against his leg. She was a talker, wasn't she? Bobby Lee said, sliding down the ditch with a yodel. She would have been a good woman, the misfit said, if it had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. Some fun, Bobby Lee said. Shut up, Bobby Lee, the misfit said. It's no real pleasure in life. So, this is the end of the story, right? And it all hinges on this moment. We're trying to add up everything that we know about the characters and everything they've done to this final moment. So we see the misfit. He's upset. He wishes that he would have been there to know what Jesus really did. Because if he would have known, if he could have seen it for himself, then it would be easy for him to choose to live according to Jesus' teachings or to do what he's doing now. He wouldn't have this internal struggle like it's very obvious that he's having over which life he should live. And the grandmother in this moment, she sees this inner turmoil that the misfit has, and she reaches out to him. Now, you as the reader, you have to determine, is this more of her manipulation that we've seen throughout the story, or is this something authentic? Now, my take on it, this is just my take, you don't have to agree with me. I think this is something authentic. His voice seemed about to crack, and the grandmother's head cleared for an instant. Now, that's really interesting. It cleared. It's like she has this revelation. She saw the man's face twisted close to her own as if he were going to cry, right? And she murmured, why, you're one of my babies. You're one of my own children. Now, keep in mind, he's got on Bailey's shirt. There's almost this enhanced imagery that he is Bailey. So she's having this moment of clarity where she reaches out and she kind of touches him with a sense of grace and love that she has for her own children. And this is what the misfit can't handle. He freaks out and he reaches for his gun and he shoots her 3 times. Now, why does he shoot her? I said that odd. Well, that's for us to determine, for you to figure out as the reader. It seems like he might be frightened that there actually is some sort of authentic act of faith being presented here by this woman, which would mean that she actually had to change her life. She had this moment, in Catholic belief, this would be a moment of grace. She has this moment of clarity and grace that's been given to her from God to see the situation as it really is. And this would make the misfit freak out, because this would kind of put more weight on the idea that, well, maybe Jesus was this guy that he said he was, right? And we know that the misfit, he's upset by this. He's got red-rimmed eyes. They look pale and defenseless. And then he declares that this woman, she would have been good every day of her life if there would have been someone there threatening her with the idea of death. So what changes for the grandmother in this situation? Well, it's being shocked. It's the idea that death is before you, and all the junk that we have considered up until this moment. So our personal images, appearances, blood, family, where we come from, high class, all of these things, they seem to fall away once we have the clarity of death before us. We realize that's not important. So some would argue that this is what's imparted to the grandmother, this moment of grace where she has this sense of clarity. And that's why the Misfit says, well, if someone could have been there to shoot her every minute, she would have lived with that sense of grace and clarity and focus on what really matters, which is her son or humanity or however you want to interpret this situation. And what's really remarkable, I think, are the last lines of this story. So Bobby Lee says, well, it's fun. And the Misfit says, shut up, Bobby Lee. It's no real pleasure in life. Now we know that prior to, he has said that there's no pleasure but meanness. And that's a little bit of an improvement. We're not saying the Misfit has now gone to the sense of goodness, right? The good man that's hard to find, but there is almost this kind of like inner ascent to something different. At one point, the only thing that gives him pleasure in life is being mean. But now, after he has this authentic moment of faith with the grandmother, it's like he's confused even more. And he's abandoned the sense that the pleasure is meanness. Now he's saying, well, there is no pleasure. Maybe a little bit of an improvement. So all these things go into our interpretation of the story. For me, it begs the question, what does it mean to really live a life of faith, right? And whether you're Catholic or Christian or Muslim or whatever faith it is that you practice or don't practice, what are your central beliefs that kind of guide your ethics and your decision making? If you really believe in those things, we should see the practical playings out of those beliefs in your life. And if we're not, then really, do you believe in them at all? Flannery O'Connor turns the idea of faith on its head because we think of faith as bringing about positive things. The Misfit here is a better person of faith in the story than the grandmother, not because he's doing good things, but because he's following through on his ideas. And it just begs the question for us as individuals. Are we following through on our deeply held beliefs about philosophy, religion, politics, whatever it might be? And that's a question we need to ask ourselves. So reflect on those things with this story. It's a great one. It's a really good one. The more times you read it, the more rewarding it will be. So that's a little bit of an introduction into A Good Man is Hard to Find with Flannery O'Connor. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope it helped you. If you're in my class, I hope it helped with your interpretation and your response to it.